morning, everybody. Welcome to All Core Devs number 109. I'll post the agenda in the Zoom chat right now if folks want to follow along. So we have a bunch of different things on the agenda, high level, mostly covering what's happening with Berlin, how we're tracking along for the London work, and then both the different high level approaches for Shanghai and a bunch of specific EIPs. So I guess just to get started, the first thing is Berlin happened on Rinkeby between the last two calls. Does anyone have an update for that? It seems like everything went pretty smoothly, but did anyone want to share anything? Okay, so we'll call that a smooth update on Rinkeby. And then for people listening, the update on mainnet will be happening before the next call, so sometimes over the next 2 weeks. I think it's scheduled to happen late on the 14th and maybe early on the 15th, so middle of the night for North America, and probably during the day of the 15th for some parts of Europe and Asia. Pooja, the cat herders are hosting a viewing party, right? Do you want to talk about that a bit?
Yeah, thank you, Tim. So the cat herders are organizing a countdown party in which we have invited the EIP authors for the proposals which are getting into Berlin upgrade. We have published an announcement blog. I'm going to share the link here for details. It's open for everyone to join, and we hope to watch the stream and see the thing live getting deployed on the blog.
Cool. Yeah, so if people want to join, I'll be there. I think it'll be midnight or 2 or 3 in the morning, West Coast, North America. Anything else on Berlin? Okay, and yeah, if you haven't updated your node, now is obviously the time to do so. There's an Ethereum Foundation blog post which lists all of the client versions. So if you just Google search for that, it should be pretty easy to see. Yeah, so make sure you update your node sometime in the next 2 weeks. So next on the agenda was London. And there's been a lot of conversations we had last time around, what should the scope of London be, and how kind of skinny versus how skinny should we keep it. And I think what's probably most useful to decide that is getting a feel of where we're actually at with the implementations and what we expect needs to be done to properly test 1559. So I don't know if one of the client teams just wants to give a quick update of where we're at in terms of testing, in terms of implementation readiness for just 1559.
Yeah, I can start. So we have a small multi-client integration testnet with Bezu, Get, and Netamind. So we have a consensus on the transaction encoding, decoding using the type transaction envelopes and access list. But Get and Bezu, we have to update the transaction receipt to include the effective gas price for 1559 transactions. Yeah, that's where we are.
Excuse me, I was just curious. So this gas implementation with 1559, is that, as far as I know, there is no such open PR against Go Ethereum. Maybe I'm mistaken.
We haven't opened it against Go Ethereum yet. We've been tracking it on our Teams branch, but we can open it against it if you like.
No, whenever you feel ready. I was just curious about it because I know that we had an old one which had been closed, but I haven't seen any new one. So I really have no idea about anything in that implementation. But it will be interesting to see it when you open it. but take your time.
Okay. Okay. I mean, I think we can go ahead and open it as a draft. It's, the consent, we're splitting it into the consensus portion and into all the other, transaction pool, that kind of stuff related topics. So
Makes
we can
sense.
open the consensus one first, since that's mostly done.
Is the one that Abdel mentioned use the transaction envelopes EIP?
Yes.
Yes.
And
Yes.
there was some like theorizing that it would be easier to implement through using transaction envelopes. I'm just curious if that like was the case or if there was any kind of differences.
I didn't personally implement it before, and so it felt pretty natural with transaction types, but I also had, worked on the transaction types even before that. So I don't know. I'm not sure if I can speak fully to it.
I was just curious. It's all right if the 1559 stuff can go into it more deeper. I mean, I can go more deeper on the channels for that.
And the other thing that came up in the chat was there just a reference test for 1559. So I think there weren't any. I don't know if there were any, period, and I know specifically there weren't any for the transactions. Does anyone have just an update on that and what would be needed to do over the next few weeks?
I'm actually working on reference tests for 1559 right now. I've got a couple of things that I've got to sort out for getting them running with transaction types against Besu, and then after that, I'm going to be taking Abdel's existing 1559 tests and getting them into reference test form and at least start the conversation around what other reference tests use cases might be necessary.
One question about the reference test. I'm assuming that test for 1559 has to be a blockchain test, right, and not state test. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, cool.
Cool. And again, I think this is your first time on the call, Gary, but Gary is on the Besu team. He recently joined.
Yeah, it's fun to hear a new voice. Welcome.
Thanks.
Yeah, welcome.
So sweet. So I guess, yeah, we'll definitely make progress on the reference tests over the next 2 weeks. Is it too early to try and set up a YOLO type network or I don't know. I guess we already have a testnet that's running between the different clients. But should we set up kind of a London proper integration testnet like we did for Berlin? What are people's thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that will be useful for. Sorry, go ahead.
You first, Abdel.
Okay. Yeah, I think that will be useful for wallet and libraries implementers. But we are just waiting to have a full consensus between the 3 clients. So we are very close. Like as I said, only the transaction receipt is missing on Get and Besu. And once we have that, we can think about spinning up the YOLO London testnet.
Does the current testnet build off of Berlin, or is it building off of some pre-Berlin branch?
Berlin.
Okay.
Thomas, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I have a bit of a question. Do we need a new YOLO testnet? Because the one that we have is on top of Berlin with EIP-1559 and the receipt changes. And this is my question here. So the receipt changes, will they cause the change in the hashes of the blocks? If not, then we can continue with the same network and just make it more available.
It should cause a hash change in the block because of the receipt route.
Yeah, I'm just not sure whether the only change in receipts is in the transport, like when sending messages over the FP2P, or it's actually in the content of receipts, changing the receipt route.
I think it's actually in the content.
Yeah.
Okay then, thanks.
So then, to be clear, then that will be kind of a consensus breaking change, and it'd be easier to start up a new testnet after that. Is that right?
Yes, yes, exactly.
Okay, so let's do that. And I'll put up a spec on the ETH1 specs repo like we had for the YOLO networks. Given we've already kind of used a lot of the YOLO testnets, and we use that name for people to not think this was Berlin, but it ended up being Berlin. Are people fine with, I don't know, saying something like London integration testnet, or I don't know, is there a name, or we can do like YOLO v4 or something like that? That people have a
Maybe we
preference?
should start calling them DevNets instead of testnets,
Yeah.
so we can have a distinction.
So London DevNet v1. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I had a proposal, which we can shoot it down pretty quick if that's what we want. But I wanted a different name than YOLO as well, and so I thought we could name them after geological fault lines, since we're kind of looking for faults in consensus clients, and that gives us a pretty large sample set of names.
Okay, and from the chat, there's also YoLondon and London Integration Testnet, which is lit. So yeah.
So I like the fault lines, but lit is also pretty good and goes well with London. So
I personally don't care about the names. We can go with whatever. But I think maybe we shouldn't tie it too hard to London unless we are absolutely certain about the scope of London. Because, yeah, the idea with these like YOLO 1, YOLO 2 is that we can kind of explore whatever features we want in them, and then maybe they go into the whatever Berlin is, and maybe they don't. It's not. But if we call it like London first version testnet, then we've kind of set the scope for London.
Yeah, and it's harder to take things out, I guess.
Yes.
And we did take stuff out previously, so that did happen. Where we tested stuff, took it out, might put it back in or not.
Okay, that's a really good point. So I guess in that case, the fault lines is probably the best kind of neutral thing where it doesn't associate to London. Yeah, like client, if you want to propose something either in the chat here or in the Alcor Devs Gitter, I can use that and put together a spec on the ETH1 specs repo.
Sounds good.
Sweet. Anything else on, I guess, the work that's been done on London so far? Okay. So I guess the next big topic, and it's kind of a meaty one, is the idea of the scope for Shanghai and the merge. So we briefly touched on that last call. But basically, there's been more and more conversations in the community about whether the ETH1 clients should focus directly on the merge right after London, and similarly, the ETH2 clients right after the Altair upgrade, which is going to happen also this summer. And you know, they're starting to have merge calls and specs, and there's the Rayonism hackathon where a bunch of ETH1 and ETH2 teams will work together on building prototypes for this. But then on the other hand, there's also a pretty long list of EIPs that people have been working on and would like to see on mainnet. It's unclear how much of those we can actually add in London. So obviously, if we focus on the merge and London is very small in scope, then those EIPs will have to wait for a while before they are deployed on mainnet. So I'm curious, I don't know, do people have general thoughts about this? I know it's a very vague and open question, but yeah, people have their hands up. So I think Ansgar, you were first.
Yeah, so just wanted to say that from my perspective, at least, it seems like community sentiments mostly seems to favor like a merge as soon as possible. And so I would say like the first kind of like decision would, from my kind of like perspective would be just to say, let's like after London, independent of like how big London will be, let's focus on the merge. And so whatever doesn't make it into London just basically will have to wait. And then like in the second step, I would say let's then try and basically include as much of these kind of as many of these features into London as we can. But definitely like always have the fallback of keeping it kind of like slimmer if we run out of time or something. But I think the most important thing should be focus on the merge after London, independent of how much we end up fitting into there.
Thomas, I think you were second.
Yeah, I think that if the community were given an information that they kind of also putting EIP-1559 delay at stake, if they're choosing for the heavier London, then maybe it will change, like the kind of sentiment that we see with the community. So that's why I was pushing for the as quickly as possible, well-defined and slim London. And then discussing what comes next and comparing the whether we can run in parallel the EIPs and the merge, or the merge happens first, or the EIPs first. So I think we'll also know a lot more after the Rionis in May. It'll be much easier to take some decisions then as well.
Mika, I think you were next.
Do we cannot work on the merge and
we missed the first part of your sentence.
Sorry about that. Are we operating under the assumption that one or more of the dev teams is only capable of doing one of either feature work or the merge at once? Is that accurate? Like, we can't all just have the teams aren't big enough to have the merge being worked on as well as feature work being worked on in parallel. Is that correct?
Well, it's worth highlighting.
I can answer.
Oh, go ahead. Yeah.
So I would say that heavily depends. Many of the suggested EAPs are kind of tiny, and the actual implementations would fit on a screen, basically. So in those cases, I don't see it as a problem. Something a bit larger, like 1559, yeah, in those cases, it becomes more of a resource problem. Yeah, but not always, and not in general.
Do we have some mechanism of identifying which of the desired features for post-London fall into the camp of we could probably work on this in parallel, or do we just have to kind of go through them one at a time and identify that?
I think the question is more like which are the ones that takes the most work. And the thing is, it's two things here: it's the implementation work and the kind of larger work of figuring out, so what are what are the edge cases here, what are the quirks, what test cases do we need to cover, what are the possible faults that someone can possibly do while implementing this, and how do we ensure that those faults aren't present, etc., which is probably more work than actually implementing it. But both of those things are easier if the change is a one-liner, obviously. Yeah, I guess it's a case-by-case basis. TLDR.
James?
I was just wondering if there's anything that's kind of close enough to be thinking about even being part of the next YOLO part of London, or any of the EIPs that close.
I mean, I think 3074 is pretty close. We have a testnet already up with our own implementation, so.
BLS has been done for like 9 months.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say.
Yeah, we have the BLS code. Base fee will be a one-liner. I mean, not one-liner, but a few lines of code. And testing should be very easy as well. The partial removal of refunds may require a bit more conversation, but I think it's well defined and actually not that hard to implement. I'm not sure about everything else. 3074 might be interesting, but we'll see. This might be more work, I guess. But it bases the things on 2718, so 2718 opened a lot of opportunities for us.
And Alexei, your hand's been up for a while.
Yeah, so I think I've kind of expressed this previously, and I do understand that people want to be super optimistic about these things, like, oh, yeah, we can do this, we can do that. But my current feeling is that yes, we should do everything. We should do London. We should also start doing merge, and we should also do tons of EIPs. But yes, it is the resource drain, as Martin said, and yes, we do have to already. I do already have to send people to work on the merge, and now I have to find out who's going to do the London, and then what happens next is that it will basically completely cut me off from even looking at the EIPs that are proposed, and so we will get to the situation which is kind of a bit reminding of the 2315, where we were so busy we couldn't look at anything, and then something was going on in the Oracle all-core dev calls, and then, well, gosh, we spotted something last minute. I mean, yes, that was my impression, that we're trying to be super optimistic and just try to pile things in. But as I understand that, not every development team is the same, and they're not on the same kind of path. So, for example, we're still essentially refactoring. We're still trying to finish things, and yeah, we are slowing down because we have to do lots of new features. But I'm not complaining. But I'm saying that please don't be, because basically all this work has to start right now. Even though the merge will plan for Shanghai, but the work already has to start right now. That, as far as I understand, it's not like we can wait till whatever June to work on this. So yeah, that's what I want to say.
I think we're in this good place that mostly like London code for planned for July is practically ready and tested. I don't know if we've ever been in such a great place before on such a big change. And as for the merge, as I say, we will have a lot of vision after May. But looking at the first call, it looks very promising on being quite smooth transition and a bit of research, and there'll be so many people involved. I mean, yeah, obviously I don't want to say these are not the reasonable concerns. I think, Alexei, you have also a good way of thinking about things that they maybe it was better to be a bit more cautious here and there. But yeah, from our perspective and in mind, I think that we are very, very confident about the set of changes, of even looking at all of those EIPs. We've already tried of some of those. We already have implementation for 2935. We have London ready. We have started to look at merge, and it seems to be not a great effort from the perspective of each one clients, more like research analysis perspectives. Yeah.
Cool. Marcelo, I see your hand is up for the first time.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. I wanted to support what Alexis is saying regarding resources. At Open Ethereum, right now we're very tight on resources. We're still doing the implementation of 1559. So we would rather not rush on some new stuff.
Got it. And Ansgar?
Yeah, so I had a question mainly for client developers. I think Martin was saying earlier that like for the kind of test nets before London, we shouldn't kind of constrain ourselves to like having the exact EIP set for London. So I'm just wondering how much like how feasible would it be to basically go ahead with all EIPs that are ready and that we would kind of ideally want to see on mainnet, and just kind of like create these fully packed test nets in the beginning, and then just kind of like iteratively kick out those that we feel like they just turn out not to be quite ready, and then just basically shrink our way down instead of like shrinking down now and then just going with a small set. So like, yeah. That would be my question.
Thomas?
Yeah, I personally think it's a great idea to create this like yellow-like testnet with all of the CIPs that we have listed on the agenda today. It would be great to see it and literally suggest that this is Shanghai or Cancun, or don't even name it. Like just if they're all behaving fantastically, then maybe only then we can talk about them in London. But I think it's quite late to really change anything in London. And I would prefer to keep it slim. But definitely, if it behaves super well, then we can say, oh, it's totally fine to go in parallel with the merge. Because we'll literally see how the work is progressing. If it's progressing slowly, then it's a very clear suggestion that actually we are focused on the merge, and it takes our brain power to think about it, to research it. And we would have that visibility of really what the resource strain is there.
So I guess trying to I don't know, aggregate all of this feedback, clearly some client teams are a bit more resource constrained than others. At the same time, there are like a lot of proposals that can add a lot of value that are not, that we might want to do. Does it make sense to like maybe grow the network? So say like, let's start with YOLO, or, whatever we're calling it. I think it was Aluth. So like the first DevNet to have just 1559, and then maybe if that's up and running smoothly, we add a few more EIPs on the second version, and then we add a few more EIPs on the third version, and try to get a list, of EIPs that are easy to add or ready to add. Yeah, Martin, I see your hand is up.
Yes. So I was just, I didn't really understand that idea about having all the EIPs in the first testnet and then iteratively removing them, because I just think it will, basically no clients will join the first testnet, maybe one client, but therefore it makes more sense to me to start with a limited set and grow it, because then all the clients who want to join it don't have to implement everything from scratch, from the get-go, I mean. But there was another thing I wanted to mention also, now that we're talking about work that clients need to do. And I'd just like to remind all the client devs that at some point, Geth will switch over to fully ETH66. I mean, we're not gonna, we would like everyone to join us on ETH66 so we can drop support for non-ETH66. And I was just hoping that work is also getting getting done. So yeah, it's just one more thing that everyone needs to do. I just wanted to remind everyone about it.
Yeah, that's a good point. The EIPs are kind of the tip of the iceberg. And then Light Client.
I just wanted to say, if we do these test nets where we start out with, mini EIPs and then kind of cull it back down, my worry is that, the EIPs that go into the test net really need to go through some process and be agreed on by core devs to some like reasonable degree, because exactly like Martin said, if we just today cut the meeting off right now and start implementing EIPs that are on the list, some of these EIPs are probably things that are immediately going to get shot down when we discuss them, or immediately people are going to want to push them back to later hard forks. And so that's just a lot of work that's going to go into implementing and maintaining the forks for the EIPs that there's really no light of day. So I would like to see the EIPs that go into the testnet at least be considered for inclusion, or some sort of stage where the core devs at least feel on principle that the EIP makes sense, and they're willing to put it into a hard fork if it's implemented properly and there's nothing that comes up during the integration, nothing comes up from the community in the coming months.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And James has like a final comment. We'll get to you, James, before we move on. But I think one way to have a better feel for that is to take some time now to go over the list and get people's feelings about the various things there. James, your hand is up.
Yeah, I was just for something realistically to get into London, it would need to be on like a Devnet in the next 6 to 8 weeks, probably, or less. So having like round one of the Devnets be 1559 plus maybe whatever if there's something easy to add, and then round two be as what we can fit in actual dev resources wise, because a bunch of them seem like you could just throw them in and it would take like 2 weeks to get most of them done. And then kind of start from there as deciding if it should go into London or not, or if it should go into Shanghai. We maybe just like go through and start packaging what we think could be packaged.
Yeah, so I agree that generally makes sense. Like the time it takes to implement and how ready they are will be a big factor. So yeah, maybe we do have like a pretty long list, and I know a bunch of people are on the call to kind of give an update or discuss their EIP. So maybe it's worth taking a few minutes to go over the list and then coming back at the end to see, how people feel about the different ones and their scope and what they add.
And starting with the easy ones.
Yeah, maybe
like a 2-sentence.
Okay, so I guess I listed them on the agenda, I guess in order of like how much people have signaled roughly that they'd like this to be potentially in London or shortly after. But this is like a very subjective list. Yeah.
I was gonna say the first question we could triage it is would this fit in like the next Devnet scope of work? Just like to get a flavor for how simple it is.
Should we go from the top?
Yeah, I think that's probably simplest. So the first one is 3403. So this is the partial removal of refunds, the kind of updated EIP by Vitalik. I see, William, you have your hand up.
Yes. So I view 3403 as a net negative. First, the proposal removes any incentive to clear state except for in the same transactions case. When smart contract engineers build around such incentives, we'll see more state bloat. Approving less than infinite will be phased out in the UX. Selling all of your tokens on most interface will leave one unit behind. Storage arrays will be cleared by setting the field size to 1 rather than 0, and leaving all entries dirty because it would be foolish to clear them. But these are only a few of the design implications. The proposal also sacrifices current elasticity, which smooths gas price spikes during peak congestion. 1559 does not provide sufficient elasticity because peak congestion lasts hours, not minutes. By sacrificing refund elasticity concurrently with 1559, we should expect a net increase in volatility that would counteract the anticipated improvements in signature time gas price estimation. While the motivations for the proposal cite brief Forex sprints as possibly dangerous, I believe them to be the top feature of 1559. Grocers don't raise their prices during peak hours. They hire part-time workers so their customers don't complain and flee to other stores. The long-term costs of potential Forex blocks are amortized during periods of lower congestion, but all nodes should be able to verify the consecutive Forex blocks smoothly, else they would be able to sync the blockchain in any reasonable time frame, or else they wouldn't be able to, sorry. As proof that the network can handle Forex today, I present Binance Smart Chain, which sets a higher gas limit of 30 million every 3 seconds, approximately 11 times the current Ethereum capacity. My dev node, which runs on an older low-end processor, gets 70 megagas per second in Berlin. So I would still be able to sync Binance Smart Chain if all of their blocks were Forex. In the previous meeting, we agreed to table 3403 if Forex wasn't a security concern. There have been better ideas floated in the Discord, such as separate markets for computation gas and storage growth. A less rushed solution might do more good than harm, and we could free up London engineering for more bandwidth for more important work, such as the base fee opcode.
Thanks. I guess, Martin, you have your hand up, but one comment from the chat. William, if you have a copy of, your remarks that people can read async, they think that would be valuable. But yeah, Martin.
Yeah, I won't answer all of that, but I do want to say that, yeah, I can spin up a testnet on a Raspberry Pi, which can do 10x what Ethereum can do from a clean state. Now, We're not on a clean state, however. But that wasn't really what I wanted to say. What I wanted to talk about was the changes that have been made on 3403 since the last call. We did change the ETH a little bit so that the refund now makes it better to end the execution setting the 0 back to 0 than if you use the 1 to 1. So it's better to use the 0, 1, 0 pattern and resetting stuff back. Something else I want to mention is that the full implementation of this in Go Ethereum is very small. It's linked from the ETH. The possible corner cases and edge cases from this, I think, are fairly limited and are easy to test within like a few, basically just executing some stores, and it's more or less tested the full coverage of the ETH. So I don't think it is a large burden on testing. And the last thing I want to mention is that something that we're seeing a lot is that miners are at times of low capacity, they are using the refund as a battery, and they mint gas tokens of various kinds into their blocks because it's free for them, and at later points in other people's blocks they can get extra money when people use their minted gas tokens. And this battery, so the Ethereum state is being used as a battery to get more money from minting a block. And I see this as highly problematic for state growth and the sinking the state. And that's something that I really think is important to get rid of as much as possible. That's about what I have to say.
Thanks. Vitalik?
I also just wanted to add that I do think that it's worth taking the 4x variance risk seriously, in part because it's likely that post-Berlin, or very possible that post-Berlin, the miners are going to vote the gas limit up just because fees are extremely high, and 2929 does mitigate some of the risks of doing that, though there's still the state size issue that'll realistically end up getting handled after the merge. And so, like, basically, it's not just a possibility of 50 billion gas blocks. It's potentially a possibility of higher than 50 billion gas blocks. And the user experience benefits of opening up more gas space are very significant. And they're probably, just in terms of raw magnitude, much more significant than the inconveniences of making refunds work somewhat less well. So just for that reason, I would be kind of wary of saying, we can handle current blocks in 300 milliseconds, and so we can handle things that are 4 times bigger just fine.
Martin, did you have another comment on that, or is your hand still up?
Oh, sorry, no, I didn't.
I guess before we make any decisions about what moves into testnets and devnets and whatnot, it probably makes sense to just go over the entire list so we have a feel for what are the different proposals. Does anyone else have any final comments on 3403 before we move on to the next deep?
Yes. I think that the 4x sprints would be very brief in scope, and most nodes that are able to process it, specifically the miners, would be fine. And even if a Raspberry Pi was left behind, they would be able to catch up in the meantime. And the reason that 4x should be fine in the long term is that sync time is the primary motivation, I think, for setting target gas limit.
Got it. Thanks. So next on the list was the base fee upcode. We've talked about this a few times. I don't think anybody had any concerns about it, or the concerns that were there, I think were addressed by Vitalik in the issue itself. Did anyone have any thoughts, comments about it?
It's as close to a literal one-liner as any EIP is likely to get. So I don't know. To me, it just feels low cost.
Anyone else?
That seems
yeah,
like
I
the
agree
best.
that sounds like a one-liner.
Okay. Okay, so yeah, let's come back to it at the end. Next up, EIP-3074. Yeah, so this is the first time I think, or maybe second, we discussed it on the call, but I know there's been a lot of change on the EIP, so it's probably worth taking a minute or two to just give some background on what it is and the changes that have been made.
Sure. So a quick summary of 3074. It's coming out of sponsored transactions, but it actually has a lot of uses besides that. It introduces two opcodes, auth and auth call. So auth lets you take a signed message that's specially constructed, and it sets a context variable that stores the recovered address from that signature. And then we have the auth call opcode that when you use it, it works like a normal call, except it sets the caller address to the recovered address from the previous signature. And this lets you do things like sponsor other people's transactions, do an ERC-20 approve and transfer in a single transaction. It has a lot of really nice like UI kind of improvements for users that we want to bring to Ethereum.
Is this something that someone could like we could have community members testing what it would be like to interact if it was on like a YOLO net? Like some stuff you sort of need more state, or some stuff is more tools and integration testing.
Yeah, so you could interact with this today. It's a little tricky because wallets don't generally let you sign arbitrary messages, but we have a testnet up already if anybody wants to play with it. And yeah, you can absolutely start using it right now and writing special contracts that use it.
I think it is worthwhile noting that this EIP, well, maybe a little bit contentious here for London. I think it does have quite a bit of interest by kind of application developers, and so at least like with regards to the question of like could this be meaningfully tested like from the user side in already like in one of these YOLO kind of testnets. I think in general the answer is yes, also just because I think a lot of these wallet developers and services like Infura and so on would be very interested in kind of like already experimenting with it once it is in a testnet. So I would expect like some prototype kind of support for it to emerge very quickly as part of the testnet stage already.
Yeah, we actually had a community call, I think it was last week, and we had a ton of interest and lots of people were interested in using it. So.
Thomas?
Yeah, sorry, I wanted to ask about security considerations. So, like, is it introducing any risk that people behave similarly to allowing unlimited spending on the ERC-20 tokens? Do you think there is a risk that people will be, yeah? Okay.
Yes, there are, excuse me, there are a lot of like significant security kind of considerations, things you at least have to be aware of. So we have this concept of like an invoker contract, and I'm just going to define it now because we're going to talk about it a lot. So an invoker contract is the contract which contains the auth and the auth call instructions. So these kind of invoker contracts are going to be like if you sign a message to one of these invoker contracts, you're basically delegating control of your EOA. So you're saying I am authorizing this invoker to act on my behalf. So these kind of invoker contracts are going to have to be fairly well audited. Users are going to have to trust them, and there's probably only going to be a handful of these well audited, vetted contracts that exist. But yeah, so it's kind of like giving away, it's delegating control of your EOA.
And like just for context there, like we out of the initial conversations that we had with a couple of wallets like Gnosis, the Rainbow wallet, the ITX people from Infuro and so on. I think most people, at least right now, would anticipate that there would be like one or a handful of ERCs for like a specific implementation for an Invoker contract, and then those wallets would only even expose the functionality to sign for like these exact implementations, to kind of like remove exactly this kind of risk factor for the users.
Sorry guys, so I just wanted to say, because we had this conversation on the Discord, but I suppose it wasn't mentioned here. I'm not going to be fighting it all the time because it's going to be very exhausting for me to do that. But I just wanted to remind that I had serious objections to this EIP, and this is because, as Thomas mentioned, the security considerations, and I think it does change the properties of the signature in Ethereum, not only for the users of this particular EIP, but for everybody. So, and although you can argue that it's not significant and it could be, it's the same on the same level as the batch transactions, but nevertheless, it is introducing something which hasn't existed before in terms of security. So the security of signing something for smart contracts does change with this EIP. And I actually wanted to compare it, well, jokingly, only semi-jokingly. You might have seen the pseudo opcode being proposed as a 1st of April joke. And I actually did look at it, the pseudo EIP, and it does have a similarity with this one. Of course, it doesn't allow you to do pseudo for, without any restrictions, but the restriction that this EIP is actually setting up on pseudo is that there has to exist a certain signature that authorizes the pseudo. But once this signature exists, it basically authorizes any number of transactions. So that is my main objections. And of course, you can still push through it, and it's very well kind of needed, but you cannot, this thing needs to be decided, so explicitly decided, whether we actually, as Ethereum users, all Ethereum users are going to accept this extra security relaxation.
So I think the specific complaint that or concern that you're raising is that we're changing the property of signatures from being able to perform a single action to being able to perform many actions. So as an example, like right now, you can make a signature that empties all of your ETH or all of your ERC, like a single ERC20, but with EIP-3074, you can make a single signature that empties your entire account and takes all of your ERC20s. And that's kind of, I think, what you're saying is your concern?
Yes, correctly. So this wasn't possible before this EIP, but it will be possible after this EIP. So just give one signature and it will empty everything that you've got from all the tokens.
Right. So I think this is similar to giving away your private key would be the equivalent, like non-EIP 3074 analogy for this. But I think EIP 3074 is a lot safer than giving away your private key because you can give it away for a particular.
People don't give away their private key right now, right?
Exactly, right, because it's not safe. But we want to be able to enable the use cases that giving away your private key does, but do it in a safe way. And that's what EIP 3074 does. We say we're giving your, delegating control of your EOA to a particular contract which can be vetted. And it can be verified. Like right now, people might want to give away their EOAs, but they can't because it's not trustless. We're enabling that kind of a use case in a trustless way.
I think it's also important again to note that wallets we've already I think we've been in talk with like 5 different major wallets, I think, something on that order at least, and they all intend to just basically lock down functionality to sign over 3074 messages completely. So basically like not expose that at all, and then only selectively introduce that back in for like specific ERCs that are like audited or something. And it's also important to note that like part of this authorization scheme that the EIP provides is that you can sign over specific data. So the smart contract can and is expected in general to have restrictions about what it can actually do, right? So in like as long as it's not a malicious attack where you just sign an arbitrary like a attacker-provided payload, basically. But again, wallets wouldn't even expose that functionality. If you sign a specific message to one of these well-designed invokers, then they would include like a restriction that the signature is only ever valid for a one-time transaction that has reply protection, all of that integrated in the contract. Yes.
Okay, you don't need to convince me right now, but I just wanted to make for a record that I did object against it, and you can't say later on that nobody objected. That's it.
Yeah, so what I want to say basically exactly what Alexei said, including including the thing that, yeah, this is basically the real pseudo opcode. And I totally get that this is very useful. Pseudo is useful, and a lot of things are very useful. But I think that I may be wrong, but I think that the people who are interested in this and who are pushing this, they see the usefulness of it, and they're wallet developers and advanced level layer 2 aggregators of transactions or whatever. I think maybe that it has not been thoroughly vetted from a security perspective on the application layer. I may be wrong. And I think that once this is introduced, there may be new attack vectors that come to light and get discovered as side effects of this. And I think that it's too early to think about adding it, even if it's even if it were simple to implement on the platform layer. I'm not sure, I'm not fully convinced that all the downsides from the UX perspective and the whatever implementation on layer 2 has been fully brought to light. And I think this needs more time. That's my, so I'm with Alexei on this at the moment.
James, you had a comment, and then Vitalik.
Yeah, I just was wondering if I'm understanding this right, that the security considerations as far as like client developers and client implementations isn't so much in the client itself, but it's that it's pushing security, that it's pushing a lot of security stuff to the application layer that hasn't really existed before. And that's like where the big security question is. There any of the underlying security things that bother people for like client developers? I mean, client development side of it, or like DOS vectors or stuff like that.
Yeah, I don't think this is a DOS vector kind of thing. I mean, I think we can handle the consensus changes as well. Yeah, what worries me is the user cut the sharp edges for users.
Have you had a chance to look at the threat model document we wrote on 3074? Because that kind of was produced out of the conversations with Alexei.
Right. No, I would have liked to really dive into it and spend a lot of time on it, and I think that would be needed. But I haven't done it, and I guess that's one reason why I think it's premature.
That makes sense.
And I mean, I suspect a lot of people would need to sit down with this and read up and really think about it hard for a number of days. And I'm not sure enough people have done it. That's my concern.
Yeah, but basically, sorry for butting in, but I think it took me about 4 iterations of basically trying to understand what it does, and then the guys explaining me what it is, and I like, okay, I was wrong like 4 times about what this EIP actually does. So I think just given a glance does not cut it. You actually have to spend a lot of time to look at it, to understand it. So that's why, you know, if we only have a few people who looked at it, I think it might just overlook something.
Yeah, like the implementation is pretty simple, but like grasping why it's safe takes a few reads through for sure.
And then it goes back to my comment in the beginning of this call, is that you essentially, when all these things are piling up on us, you know, you've got to prepare for London, you've got to prepare for Shanghai, you've got to review these things. I remember when I was actually looking at this EIP, I literally spent the entire day trying to actually even just look at this one EIP. I wanted to do it, but you can see that it does drain
a lot of energy and time from the core devs.
And so the topic has been raised sometimes about security reviews. And normally, when we're changing something in the platform, we as client developers we can kind of get the sense of, yeah, we kind of know what we're doing with this new opcode. I think we can handle it. With something like this, which touches the application layer, it might be actually make more sense to hand it off to some smart, or maybe not hand it off, but to hire some smart contract auditors that really know the application layer and the UX stuff, and have them do an additional review of it. I think that would be a good step.
Maybe just to mention that briefly, like again, because I think I generally agree with all these points raised. Just like on the topic of many people would have to look at it, I think it's maybe not kind of like obvious in the way we present it, but like I think we've been relatively active in kind of reaching out to people. It's been mostly focused more on the wallet application side, because again, that's where it's more relevant. But there, like a lot of teams have been looking into it already in a, I would say, fairly detailed level. For example, also like the consensus diligence team has been fairly involved in the process as well, and so on. Again, just in the combination of like that there are a lot of applications that would really like to have something like this in the protocol, that we are uncertain when the next feature fork will be. I think all of these are no reasons at all to make kind of compromise on the security side. All I propose at this point was like, if it makes sense at all, to maybe at least move forward with it into the Devnet phase, just because we already have the implementations ready. It's basically no effort at all. And then just see if people, like by the time we have to make the final decisions, like get in a position where they are comfortable enough, having looked at it enough and all of this. And if not, then like fine, then can just move forward to the next Devnet iteration for Shanghai, or whatever the next feature fork will be. I personally like, I mean, of course we are biased here, but like, because we have spent a lot of time with again, non-protocol developer people looking at this, I think there's a very decent chance that people would be convinced for it being secure by the time the decision has to be made. So I would personally prefer to at least move forward to that stage. But if of course people are already like convinced that there's no chance that it will make it in, then I think there's no reason why it should be part of the London Devnets.
Vitalik and Thomas, yeah, do you want to have your comments in?
Yeah. So I just wanted to say that I think in the long term, the ability for a single transaction to send or to trigger an arbitrary number of operations is going to happen, just because I think in the long run we want to move people to using smart contract wallets by default. Whether that happens, through like EIP-2938 type account abstraction, or through some flash sting, or something else. And so we can't rely on this idea that you can only do one operation per thing that you sign as a long-term security property. But I do see the kind of the rationale for not doing this too quickly. I think one thing that might be helpful is for kind of people who are skeptical about the security issues to at least kind of think through and maybe write up a document about what their specific concerns are, just so we have and move toward having an understanding of what the issues are on paper, because we are going to have to come up with ways of addressing them regardless.
Thomas?
Yeah, I think I just feel that this intuition that Martin was mentioning is important here. So we were asked not only about the security of this particular EIP, but also to answer which of those EIPs can be very lightly included in Devnets without thinking that they are very heavy ones. I think this one is heavy because it requires a lot of organization of talking to the application layer developers, to wallet creators, and so on. So maybe arranging some calls that would be specifically dedicated to this EIP, similarly as we did with EIP-1559. I think a lot of thinking, and I'm here on Alexei's side as well, and it's the one that may drain a bit more time from us to analyze properly, to read, to think of it.
Okay, that's definitely
I do
something.
want to just.
Oh, go ahead.
I do just want to mention that we did have a community call about a week ago with several wall developer teams. So we've talked with like on the order of, probably 24 people or teams specifically about this. And I do feel like the number of people who have gone in depth on this EIP is probably greater than 15. So that may not be being communicated very well because we don't post about it a lot. Allcore does, but we have done pretty substantial outreach to application developers, and we can't like force core developers to review this sort of stuff, but I feel like we're kind of at a point where we're really happy with where the EIP is. It provides a lot of value, and it's kind of down to the point where it needs to be reviewed by core developers, and I don't know how long that would take. If that's not a day or multiple days, but I think that that's really the main work that needs to be done on this EIP, because we have the resources to continue pursuing it, to London or Shanghai, whatever the next future fork is. It's just a matter of getting some sort of, tentative green light that this makes sense to put into a protocol. And then, teams have already committed resources to help, any client changes need to be done or develop things on top of it.
Like, for example, the inferior transactions team has already written an example invoker that they could use with this. Like, there's already people that are like chomping at the bit for the EIP.
So I guess clearly, like it seems like there's value in getting obviously client devs to look into this more, but I'm kind of mindful of the comments about, there's a ton of stuff that people need to look at. Does it make sense to go over the other EIPs right now? And if, at the end we decide this is something we do want to look at sooner rather than later, we can organize something like a breakout room or whatnot. But I'm a bit cautious of like deciding to organize one right now if it just leads to like client devs not prioritizing it, and then there's not a ton of value, or just doesn't move the EIP forward much.
I feel like
so one thing that I think we could probably have. I would feel a lot better if we had least authority or trail bits or whatever audit. Take a look at the EIP and make an actual report, security report from a user perspective. That I think we can do that from the foundation.
Okay.
Yeah, we can probably put together an RFP on that soon, and we can circle back with your team, Quilt, on like scoping that.
Yeah, sounds good. Just ping us async off this.
Cool. Okay, so let's have that as the next step. And then Thomas, you have a comment in the chat about looking at it and implementing it and giving your perspective. So if you want to do that as well, that's obviously very, very valuable. Vitalik, you still have your hand up. Do you have a final comment, or did you just forget to lower it?
No, sorry, I forgot to lower it.
No worries. Okay, next up on our list is 2537. So I think there's two things actually here. So Kelly is on the call to give an update on the actual precompile, and Paul is on the call to give an update about EVM-384. So Kelly, do you want to go ahead first?
Yeah, sure. So I mean, I think the brief update on EIP-2537 is that it's largely in the same state it was about 6 months ago. There's been some minor repricings to the precompile, but other than that, basically no changes. And so really what I wanted to chat about in the call today is just sort of what additional information is needed by the core developers, or if any, in terms of moving this forward to eligible for inclusion. One other note I will make is that I did put a report out into the Allcore Devs chat yesterday that gives some comparisons versus EVM-384 that Paul's done a lot of great work on. So I would just note that, I don't think that this is necessarily an either or type scenario between 2537 versus EVM-384, but that they both have their own merits. And I think the question is how best to support BLS 12381 natively in Ethereum.
So I have a question.
Sure.
So you mentioned pricing updates, and that makes me curious because the current pricing model was found to be pretty good, I think, and conservative, but good and safe. So I'm just curious how the changes are and what changed.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, from what I recall, they were relatively minor. So like, you know, a point addition went from 600 to 500. Everything is still, even with the new pricing, is over 25 million gas per second with this new pricing. So these are some changes that I'd seen Alex had made, who originally authored the EIP maybe a couple of weeks ago, but they were relatively modest changes, and it still seems like it's well within the safe boundary.
James, you have your hand up?
Yeah, as far as I know, the pricing adjustments are related to actual improvements in the implementations being used. And as a side note, 2537 and 2539 are scheduled to activate on Celo sometime towards the end of this month. So we're taking those mainnet.
Great. Yeah. Maybe one other thing to add into addition to that, one of the other developments with EIP-2537 is that a library has been created built off of Blast, which is the library used by ETH2 clients, has undergone an audit and is undergoing formal verification. So while this isn't what's implemented in the Ethereum 1 clients today, it is now a new option, for something that maybe has some higher assurance properties. And I guess, to James's point, this library is on average about 2x or more faster across every operation versus the one that's implemented today. So from a gas perspective, longer term, I think there's an opportunity to reduce it even further. But in the short term, this library.
You cut out right when you said the amount that it was faster.
Oh, sorry. It's about 2x across the board, 2x plus. So this is an option, if there were concerns about gas pricing, certainly this could be used as well.
Paul, you have your hand up?
Yeah, EVM-384 was mentioned in the issue, the agenda item issue linked from this agenda item. And I just wanted to share good news about EVM-384. There were a bunch of breakthroughs in the past few months. Now we're within 1 to 3x of the precompile, both in gas cost and in speed, 2x for common cases. And I have the doc, it shares some evidence you can reproduce. So again, 1 to 3x slowdown with EVM-384 and 2x for common crypto systems. That's it.
Thomas?
Yeah, so we have it implemented. So because this was one of the questions of how quickly we can use it. So we have it implemented based on the previous libraries, which means for Blast we would have to rewire it, but that shouldn't be too much of a problem. I think what I would love to hear is the list of use cases, who exactly will be using it, because that's slightly similar to 2315. I believe that the only concern of mine is that there are like 2 or 3 people pushing for it for some reason, which I just not fully understand as like what is the reason, what exactly are the use cases, why it was so important for Celo. And I believe there might be some fantastic cases because I just compare it to 384 and I wonder, is it great to push this one? Because it seems that it is needed, as we have 1 year already when we talk about it and people keep asking for it. So there is some expectations from the community that it will be there. So
yeah, I can maybe speak to that briefly. So I mean, I think one of the largest use cases, which is will take a while to materialize, is the support of Ethereum 2 signatures, right? And being able to use data from Ethereum 2, and I think that was one of the at least original motivations as we had looked at sort of sharding Ethereum 2 prior to the merge. So I think that was an original motivation. The second one I would say is interoperability. So currently Zcash, Filecoin, Tezos, Algorand, Chia, and Harmony, as other blockchains, all support or use the BLS 1231 curve in some way. And by and large, the main use cases there are sort of new cryptographic capabilities. So things like aggregated signatures and threshold signatures, as well as, there has been some desire to, for those that are doing ZK rollups, to move to a higher level security curve. Though certainly I think that's going to be something that is going to follow, after it gets implemented, right? I mean, I don't think that there's most of these ZK rollup projects are sort of commercially driven projects, and they're using what's available today, which is the BN curves. But I do think there is a desire to move to a higher level security curve at some point.
Yeah, sounds very convincing.
Yeah. One comment I would add is that the ETH2 related motivation does continue to apply despite the accelerated merge plan, because in order to have a rollup that verifies or that works off of data in ETH2 shards, you need to be able to verify that a cat commitments to a shard blob actually equals to a piece of data that it's claims to be. And to do that, you need to be able to do a BLS 12381 fast linear combination inside the EVM.
And I guess just to come back to the original question that Kelly, you asked, is like what core devs want to see, to move this forward. I think Mika, you had done, some work there a while back of investigating. I recall there was a conversation about, what happens if there's a consensus failure. How do we deal with that? Is that still kind of the main blocker to including this? Like, what library do we use? What do we do if there's a divergence between different client implementations and whatnot?
Sorry, was that directed at me, or are you just including my name in the question?
So I know I think you were one of the last people, or at least you were the person I think who summarized all those conversations.
Yes, that is correct.
If you have the latest, summary of where we're
sure.
at, that would be useful. But if anybody else has it, that's also good.
Sure. So my impression of the previous conversations was just that the main concern from the core devs is that they do not have on staff cryptography experts, and so if at 5 a.m. in the middle of the night, wherever the core devs live, there's a consensus failure, they don't have the expertise to step in and rapidly fix it. You'd have to call out to third parties and get a hold of them, and this is a complicates things. So it changes the risk parameters for the core devs. The issue I have with that particular argument, and this is why I'd like to come up with a solution, is that eventually we are going to need to include new cryptographic primitives like BLS because of stuff like ETH2. And so if we need to solve that problem eventually, and the longer we put it off, I think the harder it becomes, because right now there are some techniques we could use to address the problem short term, such as we put it in as a precompile and we just assert to everybody out there that if this results in consensus failure, the quick fix is to disable the precompile, and then we'll get the chain back up and running. Once the merge happens and we need BLS to do real things, we can't turn it off anymore. And so we lose that ability the longer we wait. And so the more we kick this can down the road, I think the harder it will become for us to take some easy paths to kind of testing the waters with BLS, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think those are great points, Mike. I guess, just add on, part of some of the work that we've been trying to do over the past couple months is, to make BLAST an option, just, as it does have a slightly higher assurance level and would be compatible, consensus bugs and all with Ethereum too. I think, maybe another thing to that point is that there is a wide group now of developers that has at least experience with the library. Obviously, cryptographic, pairing-based cryptographic expertise is, a limited resource, but I do think that there's a number of ETH2 developers who are, quite familiar with the internals of BLAST as well that can hopefully, mitigate some of those risks.
Okay, and James, you have your hand up?
I was just typing this out in the chat, but I was wondering if the BLS is something that we need, that would be best to do before the merge. If we did it at the merge, would it have a like extra security considerations, or could we just say let's do it after and that doesn't matter, kind of a thing?
I think it's not critical for the merge. I think it's best to do it after, and it would be good to have it before sharding.
So probably not during the merge, but either in a feature fork before or after.
I think there's little appetite to do any modifications to the EVM at the same time of swapping the consensus from fork to proof of stake, just from like a separation of concerns and security.
I mean, one question I would have is it eligible for London pre-merge, given that it's implemented in already the clients and it's been run on 2 YOLO testnets already?
Are we at the point where we can just say we should do both the BLS and the EVM 384?
I don't think 384.
Yeah. There's no EIP for
not
384
London,
yet.
but I mean in general, we should just do both eventually when they're ready.
Yeah, I just want to mention for EVM 384, I'm in touch with cryptographers who will use it for various reasons, and also EVM 384 is useful for deprecating, for example, deprecating the BN precompile. So it has a lot of applications independently. So I think that's a nice way to put it, James, is just to do both, but I don't know what the client does wants.
Thomas, you have your hand up?
I just wanted to defend Slim London once again. So I think I think that the Shanghai in parallel with the merge would be a great place where I would fully support it to be included to 537. As for London, I would love to see just EIP-1559 there and the difficulty bomb.
Got it. Just because we do have a few more EIPs, I think before we make any decisions for like the DevNets and whatnot, hopefully we can go a bit quicker. These 3 last ones seem a bit smaller. 2327 begin data. I don't think the person who actually wanted this is on the call today. So does anyone feel strongly or have any comments about it? Worst case, we can move it back to another call.
I'd like to support it. Yeah, Martin's not here. Christian brought it up for the agenda. The only possible issue I thought, and Martin Svende might be able to speak to this, is whether we're concerned about existing contracts possibly counting on invalid opcodes to stop themselves, I think, is the issue. Would that be correct, Martin?
I can't say. I don't really recall. So I think this begin data is not doing. I think it's maybe not sufficient, and it could be done differently and better. And I know that Pavel and Axik and a few more are working on different proposal, which would supersede the begin data standalone proposal. I don't know what else to say. I'm not a fan of the begin data proposal, as I've mentioned before.
I'm a fan of some such functionality, to not have to squeeze data into unreachable sections of code.
So I guess, just to keep it short, because we're close to time, clearly there's not like strong consensus and there's still active discussions on this, right? Okay. So I think we can move on to the next one.
Okay, I'll jump ahead and save time actually. This 384 AXICS superseding this with an encapsulation format several other things are all EVM changes. So I've just reopened a magician's group on that. We have the EVM channel on Discord, and I just encourage us to come together there some and discuss these EVM changes together so they can appear as sort of one coordinated set of changes whenever they do appear, and not just be a scattershot set of VIPs. And certainly that's not London and probably not Shanghai as it's going, but
That makes
that's
sense.
all.
Yeah, thanks. I posted the link to that ETH Magicians thread in the chat here for people who want to contribute.
Just to respond to Greg, I agree. I think Christian called for a conference, an EVM improvements conference, or something where we can all get together. So I think this is aligned with what Christian said during the subroutines discussion recently. So I think it's a good idea for us to all come together. I just want to say, I think there's too many moving parts right now with the merge, with 1559, all of these things, like you said. So I think that nothing is so urgent that it has to be done immediately. But yes, I agree that we should all come together and all have some sort of conference or meetings about future of EVM and EVM improvements. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, lots of things we would like to have conferences for right now. Unfortunately, we can't. Next up, I think this was a pretty small leap. 2677, sorry, this is limiting the size of init code. I think, Martin, you were the author on this? Yes.
Yes, I was. It limits the size of init code because code is already limited. And yeah, so currently someone can execute 1 megabyte of init code, which is not really a problem. It has happened, and any client which can pull simple chain can obviously handle it. However, there might be situations in the future where we want to do more work, and I'm thinking of things like where we want to validate more things about the execution, and not only do the jump test validation, maybe we want to do other kinds of validations. And whenever we want to implement that, it would be nice to have a guarantee that we will never do this on a piece of code which is larger than 48K. So if your implementation can do whatever kind of validation is needed within a certain amount of time for 48K data, then you're going to be fine. And we're not going to have new cases of denial of service attacks where someone exploits these validations on 1 to 2 megabyte malicious init code data. That's about it. Implementation-wise, it's small. It touches 3 points: create, create to, and transaction create. And the semantics of erroring in these cases are not new. That's about it.
One kind of longer term point on code. So when we have code merkleization, and so we'll be able to have witnesses that only touch the part of the code that a particular transaction executes. One side effect of this is that it would theoretically be possible to allow to create much larger contracts, because each transaction would only still be able to access a small portion of that code because of gas restrictions. Do we anticipate any kind of secondary risks of that? Like, do we anticipate there being any kind of fundamental risks of code that gets created going up to, say, 0.5 megabyte, even taking into account that the create opcode would still have to pay 200 gas for that?
I would say no, because even if we execute on arbitrary large code, if that code is merkleized, then we don't have to load that entire code into memory to do the jump test validation, because the merkleization will already provide us with that information. However, if we have the init code, I mean, it's still useful at that point to have a limited init code.
Right, agree, because you have to do linear time pre-processing. Like, and whatever the Merkling is, would have to do the linear time pre-processing, and that's fine if you charge 200 gas for it, but for an input, we don't. Yeah, seems fine.
And I think the main security concern here is that, yeah, whether that limit is high enough that we don't break anything. That is something which is kind of easy to check. I have not done so. I don't know if anyone else has done so either.
I have played around with some cache thrashing attacks with EVM code, and they do increase. So, you know, if you have a large bytecode and you can make each, like a lot of maybe perhaps jumps, and then each one causes some sort of a cache level miss or something, there is a slowdown. I don't know how big it is. I got up to 2x slowdown. Maybe people can do worse as the bytecode size grows. So it's this sort of cache hardware, you know, you have to understand how the hardware works. I don't know what the limit is, but I think we should talk about it. I'm willing to prototype or extend my prototypes to larger, you know, longer bytecode sizes and things like that.
Oh, I wasn't really referring to attacks using large unit codes. I think I know the worst case, the notorious case for geth, and I think all client developers who have implemented jump analysis knows what is the notorious case for their client. I was more thinking if there are existing large contracts where the init code is more than 48K, because the init code deploys not only one, but one, you know, 2 or 3 contracts at the same time, and we would thus destroy them with this kind of change. That's what I meant that we haven't really investigated. It would be prudent to do that.
Okay, we only have a minute. I guess we're going to go over by a few minutes if that's not too bad. Thomas, yeah, sorry, I asked about 2935 in the chat. I don't think we can get in depth into it now, but do you have any quick comments you want to make or things that people should look at or consider?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, sure. So we have the initial implementation of the 935, and we'll focus on adding the test cases for this that can be used by other clients to test implementation. So 2935 introduces lots of opportunities for the stateless clients and synchronizations of stateless clients, but also interesting use cases for decentralized finance applications where you can do some checks on the past state and make settlements based on that. Yeah, that's it. And I'd like to propose it to the devnets alongside the other opcodes.
Okay.
Yeah. A quick question of implementation. Like, is that like a week kind of thing, a 4-week, a complexity, just a hand waving number?
It took me 3 hours, but I think to properly analyze it around it, it may take maybe a day or two.
Okay, cool.
Okay, and then the last one we had on the list was discussing the difficulty bomb. So we all agreed to put it in. We never agreed how far to push back the bomb. I feel like that's a better conversation to have once we've agreed whether Shanghai is the merge or not, and have a better view for London. Does anyone have any kind of urgent comment about the difficulty bomb?
Nope.
Okay. If not, I think, yeah, if people can stay for a minute or two, the last thing that would be useful to figure out is what do we want to do for the different devnets? Just being mindful of, you know, how frequently.
You're cutting out.
Oh, am I? Am I still cutting out?
I hear.
Only if you're fine.
Oh, sorry, I'm cutting out.
Cool. So for the devnets, you know, a lot of people have mentioned there's already a lot of things we're working on. I would propose that the first devnet be maybe only 1559, and that we start to tentatively add stuff for like a second one. Do people have any thoughts on that?
Makes sense.
Okay, so and I forget what.
I would maybe just maybe the base fee opcode,
Yeah.
possibly.
I was gonna say base fee as well. That one feels like I don't see any reason to not throw base fee in there. It's just so simple.
Anyone disagree with that base fee opcode in 1559?
I'm okay to include it.
Okay, so let's do that. Let's add the base fee opcode to the Devnet. Do we want to discuss, I know we're already over time, what we would potentially put into a second DevNet, or do we just want to wait and see how this one goes and have that conversation in 2 weeks?
2 weeks. I put something in chat, but I can just put it in the Discord.
So the DevNet, okay, yeah, I see your comment. Okay, so let's maybe wait another 2 weeks. Anyways, there's still some work to do on 1559 to resolve the spec. So it's not like we're setting up the DevNet tomorrow. But I'll put a specification for the DevNet up probably early next week. But just at a high level, we'll include 1559 and the base fee opcode in this first version. And we'll use, I forget what the name was, but the name that Light Client proposed earlier on in the call. And that was it. Any final comments, thoughts? Okay, well, thanks everybody, and happy Easter to whoever is celebrating.
Thank you. Have a nice
Thank
weekend.
you.
Cheers.
Thanks,
Thanks,
everyone.
everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
started. Okay, so welcome to the merge.